Throughout most of my career as an artist, I've had a choice to make of whether I would have a house with an easel in the corner or an art studio with a bed in the corner. I couldn't have both.
So, Virgil Elliott, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm flattered that you consider me worthy.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Well, I was lucky enough to be born during World War II, before modern art had really taken over. And I knew nothing about it until I read in, Life magazine about Jack the Dripper. And I was a little kid then, but I had already been drawing for several years and was serious about it. And when I read that, I thought, I can ignore this. It's going to blow over in a few years. This was about, I guess, 1951 or something. Or, no, people can't be that stupid. They can't be that gullible. So I figured by the time I'm an adult, I'll be really a good artist. All this modern art nonsense will have blown over, and I'll be able to have a good career as an artist for the rest of my life. And I assured myself that people couldn't possibly be so stupid as to fall for this crap for more than, a couple of years. It's got to be a passing fad. That was what I thought. Now I'm 77 years old, and just a few people are just now starting to figure it out.
So who inspired you in your art?
Early on, anyway, there was an artist when television first got started. Now, I remember before television, but when television first got started, I was a little kid, and there was a show on called Learn to Draw with John Nagy. And this was, I guess, late 40s or early 1950s. And it was very unusual for a man to have a beard at that time. And John Nagy had a Van Dyke beard. And he was my role model, cool guy, and he was an artist. And you could buy at the art supply store, or maybe at toy stores, for all I know, the Learn to Draw kit. Early on also, Norman Rockwell.
Yes.
And the funny papers. And so Prince Valiant by Harold Foster, that was a well-drawn strip. And Lil Abner with Al Capp drawing, a tremendous satirist and caricature artist. And unbeknownst to me at the time, Frank Frazetta was actually doing most of the artwork for Al Capp. He had assimilated Al Capp's style. He worked for Al Capp, and Al would just draw it up, in a rudimentary manner with pencil, and then turn it over to Frazetta, who he called Fritz. And Frazetta would actually ink it and do the coloring and so on. I was drawing every day, all through school, getting in trouble for it. The teachers thought that was a goofy thing to do. They thought I was supposed to just pay attention to what they were doing without drawing. There's an instrument in my hand that will make a mark, and there's a piece of paper in front of me. I am drawing, because I started drawing before I learned to write. And for that matter, I learned to write before I went to school, too. My mother was a school teacher. And so they would raid my desk and destroy my drawings every weekend. Every Friday, after we went home, they'd go through my desk and throw out all my drawings. And Monday I'd come in and I'd be furious. They had destroyed all my drawings. Now my mother signed me up for a course, a mail order course, the Famous Artist School course. It was put out by some of the top illustrators of the 1940s and 50s. And I got some good instruction from them. I took the illustration course, I also took the cartooning course, and I got something out of both of them, but the illustration course was the most helpful. And it was all done through the mail. I never met any of these instructors in person. I wish I could have, but they were in Connecticut and I was in St. Louis, Missouri. It was all done. We shipped things back and forth to each other in a chipboard box. They'd pick it up when they got it and they'd put tracing paper over it. And with red pencil, they would write comments, make suggested changes, sometimes do an entire different drawing just to give me an example.
What brought you to creating your book? And I know we just came out with the second edition. I think it's the second edition this year. Is that right?
After I got out of the Army in 1966, I had a good painting class in the evenings while I was in the Army stationed in Germany. The only good painting class I ever had. And I wanted to continue learning. I was pretty good, but I wasn't as good as I wanted to be. I had been inspired when I saw paintings in a museum by the old masters, in particular Rembrandt. And I was 12 years old when that happened. And so that kind of shifted my direction away from wanting to be like Norman Rockwell and a comic book illustrator, or, to I wanted to figure out how could Rembrandt create such a lifelike image, a living man behind a window rather than a flat painting in a frame. Man was looking at me, about to speak to me. I thought, this is magic. It's got to be like magic. I want to figure out how to do that. So when I got out of the Army, I took art classes at one college or university after another. And I was so disappointed with them. They were trying their best not to teach me how to be better. They were trying to get me to ignore how good I was and go back to knowing nothing, because they were trying to indoctrinate me to the modern art way of thinking. Mm-hmm. They said, oh, you have so much to unlearn. I said, I didn't pay money for art classes at a so-called institution of higher learning to unlearn any goddamn thing. Pardon me.
Sure.
I get passionate about this subject because it made me angry. After 4 different schools, I realized the entire academic system is wrong. It violates my sense of justice, my sense of right and wrong, and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to study hard. I'm going to learn this stuff on my own if I have to, until I'm good enough that I can help people who are like me now. And so that's what I undertook to do. And eventually I was good enough to start teaching. I started entering art competitions, around 1982, I guess it was. And I started winning awards right away. And so people will approach me saying, do you teach art? Would you like to teach art? I said, well, okay, yeah. So I was teaching a class at a private art gallery that had a large teaching room. I had about 12 students. In 1985, my students asked me, what book can you recommend that has everything in it that you're teaching us? I said, well, there are a lot of books out there, and I've read them all. And they all sound very persuasive when you first read them, but none of them have everything in it that I'm teaching you. There's bits and pieces of good information in a lot of them, but there's also information in a lot of them that I think would be confusing to you and difficult and wrong. So I can't really recommend any of them wholeheartedly without reservation. And they said, as if they had rehearsed this before I had shown up, in unison, they said, then you have to write one. And then I remembered that promise I had made to myself in 1967, I guess it was, or 68. And I thought, yes, I do have to write one. So that's when I got started on it. And this was before I had a computer or knew what computers were. I started with a pencil on a piece of paper, a notebook full of paper. I didn't realize at the time that it was going to take me 22 years to get it finished and published, but I wanted it to be good. And so I really stepped up my research at that time. I took another trip to Europe after I got a divorce from my second wife, and I was the only one spending my money. I could afford just barely to go to Europe on a very shoestring budget. However, I spent all my time over there in art museums, but I was overjoyed, happy. I went over there with some specific goals that I wanted to figure out how the old masters got certain effects that I was still trying to figure out and baffled by. And since then, I made several other trips to Europe. And all the cities in the United States that have art museums in them, I've been through those. I became a member of the ASCM subcommittee on artists, paints, and materials. I think it was 1996 or 97. And on that subcommittee, I met paint chemists from all the major art materials companies in the world. And I kept my ears open at these meetings. I learned so much. We were doing everything from a scientific perspective. And the more I listened, the more I realized a lot of the stuff that was written in these old books is wrong. A lot of the old books were written on the basis of people's visual analysis of paintings that were done hundreds of years before they were born. So they didn't really know how these paintings were done. They were merely guessing. With the advent of modern testing materials, we were able, or not we, but the conservation community was able to analyze paint samples from the actual paintings, and they determined what was actually in them. And so it debunked a lot of what I had read in these old books that were written very convincingly, very compellingly by good writers, and some of them were good painters too, but they were still wrong because they didn't have modern science and they weren't alive when the old masters lived. I wanted to address all of that as much as the publisher would allow. Now, they kept wanting me to write more. And I thought, oh, great, they're going to let me do a 500-page book. And after I wrote a 500-page book, she says, okay, now we've got to pare it down to 196 pages. I says, wait a minute. No, that was unacceptable. So I went over her head. I went to the senior acquisitions editor that I had, who had accepted the book in the first place. I explained the situation to her, and she went to bat for me with the publisher, and she got them to grant me another, 32 pages, I think it was. So I got to put a little bit more into the book than the other editor was going to do. So anyway, we went round and round and round, and eventually the book was published finally in 2007 in its first edition. When they finally gave me the proof of it, I noticed that they had messed up some of the captions to some of the illustrations. Well, when I saw that, I called up the senior acquisitions editor, and I said, "Stop the presses. You know, this has to be fixed. There's some garbled verbiage in the captions, and there's a word that has an S on it that doesn't deserve to have an S on it." When it went into its second printing, after the first 5,000 were sold, or whatever, however many that run was, I don't really know, I made them make those corrections. And I made them make a few more too, because a year after the book was first out, I got some new information from Marion Mecklenburg, who was the senior research scientist at the Smithsonian Museum Support Center. That edition of my book went through 6 different printings with changes made to most of them. And then Watson Guptill got bought out by Random House. And so then my publisher was Random House for a few years. Ultimately, Random House decided that my book was not profitable enough, not continuing to be profitable enough. The sales weren't as great as they were at first. And when I got that information from them, I insisted that they release me from the contract so that I could find another publisher, because I was being besieged by other publishers who wanted to take over the book. So I negotiated with Echo Point Publishers, and I told them I would agree to let them redo the book if they would let me update it. this is the edition that came out in 2019. The best place to buy it is from the publisher. And here is the information. But I'm happy that Echo Point, they're treating me right and they're selling it for a reasonable price. And as long as I'm plugging,
yeah,
I also have a video that just came out, a couple of months ago.
I want to thank you for giving this time and wonderful stories, and I feel like I've got to know you even more. And so just thanks for taking your time with us.
You mean we're done already?
Yeah, it's been...
I could talk for several more hours easily.
Very good. Well, Virgil, thank you so much. And
well, thank you, Jay. I'm really flattered that you felt that I was worth this.
Absolutely. And I look forward to talking to you more.
Well, we can do it again whenever you want.
All right.